this long now. Anakubi in behind. The ball holds up. He's going to take it himself. Sam Anakubi in a lane. Comprehensive, courageous Canada. They're going to win this. Can you believe it? They do. Red, white, and freezing cold. Oh, Canada. Oh, baby. Another famous victory and another big step forward in the quest for Qatar.
Well, what an absolutely unbelievable way to kick off the One Soccer Roundtable. Thank you so much for making us part of your Tuesday evening once again. My name is Adam Jenkins, here with my friends and colleagues. Of course, that's Oliver Platt, Christian Jack, and Charlie O'Connor-Clark. We're going to dive right in to what was just an unbelievable match. One for the ages. Those highlights will give you goosebumps now, and they probably will 30, 40, and 50 years from now. 2-0, of course, for Canada in Hamilton over the United States of America. Let's quickly reset the table for you just to make sure it's front of mind. It is Canada on top on 22 points, followed by the Americans and Mexicans tied for the final two automatic qualifying positions on 18. Panama in fourth on 17. Then it goes Costa Rica 13, El Salvador 9, Jamaica 7, and the winless Honduras still on 0 points. Let's just begin with an immediate reflection. Now that you guys have had a couple of days to let the results sink in, thaw, hopefully, especially KJ and Ollie, who were out in the freezing cold with us, and Charlie, who had the heated press box to deal with it. And I'll begin with you, KJ. And sorry, just before we begin, reminder, get your questions in or your comments in to the chat wherever you're watching. We're going to get through as many of them as the hour progresses. We also have a special guest joining us at 8:30. Okay, KJ, without further ado, your immediate reflections on the incredible match that was in Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Great to be with you, and great to see so many people here in the chat and joining us on a night like this. And that's what galvanizes the nation, right? That's what people want to talk about right now. And the game was Sunday. The game again is another game coming up tomorrow, and the momentum and the storylines in between is what's really standing out for me, because in all my years of broadcasting in this country, I think so often it was turn off the broadcast, switch it off, and please join us to start talking about it next time when we're about to kick off another game, and we might have a 5-minute pre-game show if we're lucky. And we hope everyone comes back. And now all the national networks are talking about it, the news networks are talking about it, everyone's talking about it. It's all across the papers. The great journalists who cover this game are getting their due diligence as well. And so that's, for me, on the media side, is what I'm talking, what's on forefront of my mind and what I want to talk about, because these players deserve it. They're getting all the publicity. I'm seeing Sam Adakubi with my buddy Tim McAuliffe, and you guys are talking all about it on One Soccer, and for me, Ollie, that's the big thing right now in terms of the media and the way it's being covered, and that's pretty special in this country.
Yeah, just a constant conversation, and it really feels like a real shift in this country, right? I think that's going to take time. It'll probably take a generation for soccer to really take hold in the way that we think it can do. But, this is a country where we've talked about this a lot. There's a lot of people from a lot of different parts of the world that are maybe countries that the number one sport is soccer, right? And they've all come to Canada, and we're starting to see what that can create and the potential of that in terms of really building a soccer nation here. So that's players, that's fans, that's everyone that I think has a passion for the sport. And yeah, it's a pretty special time for sure. Just enjoying these qualifiers, right? Because there's not many of them left, and obviously in the 2026 cycle, we're probably not going to have the same kind of journey with the automatic qualification. So just trying to make the most of this as much as I can.
Charlie?
Yeah, it's just such an incredible moment to see soccer kind of break into the mainstream of this country on that day, and it really, really did. I mean, social media exploding, just being on the GO train home and hearing the entire train buzzing with people coming out after the game, who a lot of them that I could overhear hadn't been to many soccer games or any soccer games before, but it's just such an easy story to sell, I think, to a lot of Canadians, beating the Americans. That's something we all love to do. And just for it to happen like that at Tim Hortons Field with that really great atmosphere, allegedly 12,000 fans in the stands. But just the day was perfect. I mean, the weather wasn't as bad as we might have dreaded it could be. And the game was just so much fun from the very beginning for just Canada to get out to that kind of start. That goal just so quickly was just a perfect storm of circumstances for them. And it really, really has had the entire country talking about men's soccer in a way that I'm honestly not sure it ever has been.
Yeah, it's been absolutely sensational. And I would be lying if I said yesterday on my way up to Bracebridge and hopping around breweries and just a long drive, I was listening to every American podcast I could just to enjoy the sour, how did we lose to Canada? And it just wasn't even the questions anymore. It was how emphatically the Americans were beat by the Canadians, and just a day to remember, like the three of you added. We're going to mention
handling it well, are they?
No, they're not. It doesn't matter where you go, what network, what colors they fly. It's some people are blaming Pulisic, some people think Greg Berhalter is the reason why they came up flat and they lost. And we're gonna touch on the Americans a little bit later in the hour. But you're right, KJ, they are not handling it well, which I know for a lot of Canadians makes it just that much more sweeter. Well, we'll dive into the match tomorrow, of course, because this window certainly isn't over yet. The Canadians are in El Salvador as we speak, and we'll have a little bit more of an in-depth preview on that. But I want to start with our first question from YouTube. It comes from Carl Heistad, who asks, will we rest some players and give opportunities to others, or play this normally and give experience to the, quote, appropriate players in this game? What do you think, Ollie?
I think they will approach it pretty much like any other qualifier. I don't think there's any sense that I'm getting, at least from this team, that they're going to take their foot off the gas. They're going to start rotating and experimenting. I think we've mentioned it before that they have a goal of going through these qualifiers unbeaten, and they want to see that through. So I think certainly tomorrow night's game, but even when I look ahead to March as well, I don't think this is a team that's going to start. Even if they've mathematically qualified, I don't think we're going to see major changes to the team. Tons of new players coming in, loads of shifts tactically and experimentation in that way. I think they want to go through these qualifiers full tilt all the way and see what kind of record that ends up with, KJ.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, first of all, there's lots of reasons to try and win every game here, even when you've qualified. We can get into it today, or maybe we can do it in March. We can talk about the pots and the world rankings and the effect of what that could happen in the World Cup draw. Yes, this is real. We're talking about where Canada could be placed in a pot in a World Cup draw. But I think, like Ollie said, I don't think they want to make too many changes. I expect Hutchinson to play. Eustachio's apparently available, so why wouldn't he play? So that's two automatic changes right away. Kennedy could come in. We know Vittoria is suspended. Daniil Henry could come in for a game. Can they push players that have played twice already into a third start? Would you expect David to play from the start, or do they go with a Larin? I think that they're all reasonable questions that they need to ask. Knowing that it is an unusual window. This is not October, this is January. Clubs are still watching players' minutes and monitoring them, and David's put in a shift for two very good games. Larin came off a bit earlier in both. So I think there's a couple of things to keep an eye on there, whether Hoylett will come back. But as Ollie said, there's no giving players a chance here because of the standings. They've never been seduced by the scoreline. They've never been seduced by standings from day one. And they're not going to do it now, Charlie. They're going to go out there and believe that they picked the best team to find the right balance between understanding MLS players haven't got a lot of game minutes in them over the last few months, and understanding to maybe try and pick a few more European players that didn't necessarily play on Sunday.
I agree. No, I agree completely. I think it's still 3 points ahead of anything else at this point, right? I mean, even as you guys said, after Canada mathematically qualify, you're still looking for those wins. You're still looking to pick up points and keep picking up ranking points. But yeah, this team is not, at this point, after all the progress it's made, it's not going to mess with things too much. It's not going to change what's been working. This El Salvador game is still an important game. It'll still be a difficult game. We can't forget that they're still going on the road to Central America, which is always difficult. They're playing against a team that has been extremely hard to break down at home in the octagonal so far. There are individual players, I think, that might get an opportunity, not just for the sake of having one, but maybe to to just give them this chance. Obviously, there's players that have been asked to do a lot in these last 2 games. I think we've already mentioned them all. But yeah, I'd expect Daniil Henry to probably come in. If there's one player in particular that I think maybe is one that you give an opportunity to here, it might be Ike Ugbo, because we haven't seen a whole lot of him in a Canada shirt, and that's maybe the only experimental thing I could kind of foresee happening. But for the most part, again, it's a game that you still really want to win. It's a game that you need the 3 points in, and until that's in the bag, there's really no messing around with anything for this team.
I want to circle back to a question that I'll spring on you guys a little bit, but mentioning Daniil Henry and Ike Ugbo, I'm curious for you gentlemen and for the chat as well. What's the visual or the moment from the game yesterday that sticks out for you? And what's going to be the first thing you think back to when you reflect on this game? Ugbo, for me, it's desperately trying to get in the game, warming up, and then the 5-minute process of taking his earrings out before he was ready to go. Daniil Henry, of course, losing his mind when Junior Hoylett just was dancing and nutmegged his defender. But Charlie, what's the first one that's going to stick out to you when you think back of the match?
I think when I think about the match and how it transpired, I think for some reason the image that's sticking out to me is Tajon Buchanan staring down Serginho Dest when they kind of came together in that tackle in the box, and Buchanan sort of stands his ground and Dest sort of has to slink away, because I felt like that was a bit of a metaphor for how the entire game unfolded, with the way that Canada were not being pushed around. They were sort of the bullies in that game, and the US kind of backed off them in a lot of senses. So I think that's the one that's going to stick with me.
Ollie?
It's got to be that, right? Sam Adekubi, I think, taking that goal. Yeah, like I know Sam was a winger, but I think when he was growing up and is an attack-minded fullback. So he's obviously got ability, but to see him go through that like that, just to beat a couple of defenders to the ball. Then he's got a lot of work to do. Like when you're carrying the ball from the distance out that he had to carry it to get into a goal, kind of shooting position. I couldn't believe what I was seeing when he scored that goal, to be honest. That was one that, for me, was right up there with the best goals we've seen in these qualifiers.
Yeah, I'll go with that, Akubi, too. There's something pretty magical about, like, and we've all got our teams. Charlie and I know who our team is. But, when you score a goal near the end of a game and that's the moment you've won before the final whistle, that moment where you can go crazy as fans and you have that opportunity, that is really special. It's a different feeling than the final whistle. Final whistle comes with an overall of emotions that can lead to tears and relief and just incredible roar of emotion, because you've definitely won. But that moment before the whistle, when a goal actually cements it before that whistle, is really unique and special. And fans will know that. Toronto FC fans know that. That was what the Vasquez goal did for TFC. I remember talking to Greg Vanny about that. And then when obviously he had that look up to the sky and thought about his mother who passed away, and he had that little tear in his eye, and players in that party. Toronto FC had that party, and Hamilton had that party on Sunday. That was what I'll remember, looking around thinking, it wasn't that long ago we were told here that there may not be anybody sitting in these seats because of the restrictions. And now there was a party before the whistle, and then the whistle happened, and then there was another party, Adam.
100%. And of course, the visual of the bus, I think, because that's the one. Every single player that came in through the tunnel, every single one of them walking back, still looking over their shoulder, like, can you believe this? And just the ear-to-ear grins, and then how quickly it goes into the assassin's mentality. That's definitely another one that will stick with me. Charlie, you put out a really good piece yesterday. It's available, of course, on campl.ca and on onesoccer.ca as well, talking about everything we've dreamed of, where you asked the question, is John Herdman is captivating the country as you would expect him to, and I guess I got the question that asked, and would be happy for you to share some of what's in your piece, but do you think he's carving the same sort of path that he did with the women's national team? Can you compare them? Is it different? It's not better or worse, it could just be different? Charlie, what do you think?
He is in a way, and I think that's exactly what he said that he was going to do, what he promised he was going to do when he took over this men's team in 2018, which was, at the time a bit of a risk, a bit of a gamble for Canada Soccer to do, and obviously it was a kind of a controversial decision. But I kind of look back at his first press conference in 2018 when he'd just taken over the men's side. He talked about those successes that he'd brought to the women's program. Obviously the women's game, the international game on that side, is very different to something like qualifying for the men's World Cup in CONCACAF. They're completely different animals, but there is that same sort of energy where John Herdman took that women's team to 2 straight Olympic games and they won bronze medals, right? And those were moments where the entire country was looking at them. They were one of the biggest stories when they played that semifinal against the Americans in that London Olympics. It was arguably the biggest sports story in the entire country for days after that, especially the way that transpired. And this is what Herdman said right when he took the Canadian job. He said, or the men's job. He said, I want to give these moments that stop the country and make everybody look at soccer in this country. And I don't think we can dispute that he's certainly delivered that, especially in the last few months here. And because he was very honest about the things that hadn't been present in the men's side. There was this kind of mental performance aspect that he felt just wasn't there. And he said that the players had all kind of agreed with him. So he brought in all of these experts and, scientists and all this sports science and psychologists and all of these sorts of things to try and change the mentality and the culture of this team. And it's just unbelievable how it's paid off. I think, especially in this last year, it's been really fascinating to watch. Even the players themselves, Milan Borjan after the game on Sunday, he was asked, what's changed? Because he's been in this program for 12, 13 years now. He said, I only have 2 words. It's John Herdman. And that was it. He did refuse to elaborate, which was amazing. That was actually just a fantastic press conference all around from Milan Borjan. So if you haven't seen all of that, you should definitely look it up. But Sam Adekubi as well. He said just in his last 2 years, especially under John Herdman, we've grown up. And I feel like that's something that the Canadian men's program actually really needed, because they did kind of crumble under these pressure moments. They didn't deliver when it was most required of them, and now they are. And a lot of that has to be down to John Herdman and the way that he's drilled that into this team.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. Sorry, Adam, I just want to add to that in terms of Charlie's piece is so well written, and it covers a lot of things, because I think he's bang on, where we see now that this team is very different on the field. But for those that are finding it for the first time, you have to understand that it's very different off the field. Canada Soccer is very different. This team, this organization is very different. Now, there's a saying I used to say many, many years ago covering this game: incompetence off the field leads to incompetence on it, right? And that's what that summed up Canada Soccer for a long time in the men's game, no doubt. But outstanding sports performances come from outstanding sports environments, and that's what they've created. And he's done a lot of hard work, by the way. And he's a lot of great players have come on, and the players deserve a ton of credit away from this as well. But Ollie, this is a guy that is you've almost got the image of cap in hand going around in Bay Street handing out, asking for money. This is what they were doing. They needed more financial investment. They needed more people to pay attention to this team. And many people said, "Come back to me when you're relevant." And now they're coming. But before that, some of them are already there because of the way that John was able to talk them into it.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing is that, rightly or wrongly, and this probably does reflect inequalities between the men's game and the women's game, but what he's doing with the men now will have the greater lasting impact. That there's no escaping that, because that's not to take anything away from the women's achievements, which have obviously been incredible with John in charge and now with Bev Priestman as well. But we all know that the big money is in the men's game and at the Men's World Cup. And that's something that John Herdman spoke about when he took this job, was feeling like in order to really take the program to the next level, it had to come from the men. Like the women had kind of maxed out their earning potential, basically, in the amount of revenue they could bring into the program. So it had to be a Men's World Cup. Obviously, we're nearly there, pretty much there now. And that's going to have a lasting impact on all aspects of Canada soccer and Canadian soccer all over the country for many, many years to come.
On the topic of recently published articles, and there's a question from Danny Kacher that I want to get to in just a moment, but Ollie, quick first, you had an article on OneSoccer.ca as well where you're going through your locks for Qatar. You dared to go that far, so give us the Platts notes on that one, and when it comes to the locks, I want to hear KJ and Charlie's opinion if Ollie's right or wrong on some of these.
Okay, how do you want me to do this? You want me to read out the locks?
Yeah, let's do that.
If there's any... Okay, stop me if you want to stop me at some point. Milan Borjan.
Yes.
I think we're all good with that one. Tejan Buchanan. Jonathan Davids. Alphonso Davies. Stephanie
I have an
Stankio.
issue with that Alphonso Davies one. I'm not sure if that's where we want to go.
He's commentating on the game now.
That's right.
That's true. He's not too busy. Stephanie Stankio, Atiba Hutchinson, Alistair Johnston, Kyle Larin, and Richie Larea are my 9 locks for the roster right now.
No issues for me.
There's a couple that are right on the borderline, right? Like Stephen Vittoria is one I wrestled with. I think he is very, very close to being a lock. Sam Adekubi's getting to that kind of status now as well. But I just think there's a bit more room for something to potentially change within a year compared to those other 9 guys I've got.
All right, carry on, mate.
Yeah.
Carry on.
No, sorry, I just meant like that. That's right. I mean, we could debate the nuances forever, but I just wanted to make sure that KJ and Charlie didn't have any issues with the locks, or if you guys think he's missing a lock.
He's missing locks, isn't he? Come on. I love Ollie because he's so reserved on this, and I have to say, I think he does a great job of it because it's a fantastic piece. And I love how reserved he is on but I would put quite a few of the probables in the locks. I think this close to Qatar. And bear in mind, Ollie does a great job of outlining the fact that if they're injured, then obviously, they're going to miss out. So we're not considering them if they're injured. But under Ollie's probables, I would go Adekubi, Crepeau, Kay, Azorio, Vittoria, and Miller as locks.
Locks?
Yeah, because I don't think there's anything that they can do this year if they play and don't get hurt that would keep them off that team.
Yeah. I don't really disagree. I think there's just like a tiny little possibility with some of them. Like Kamal Miller, for example, Cornelius and Kennedy could have a fantastic 2022, right? And maybe that brings it slightly into question. But I'm picking at hairs.
But I love the piece.
Yeah, definitely go check it out on onesoccer.ca if you haven't read it already. It is a really good piece, and Ollie's getting really, really good at clickbait's the wrong word, but knowing how to push buttons of the fans and just the right.
Thanks, Adam. Glowing
levels.
Endorsement.
I'm so proud of you, Ollie. But here's the question that I did want to ask from Danny Kacharian, who asks, do you think Canada expands its roster next window, so in March, to invite dual nationals like Mitrovic and Flores, Jebison, or Smith, or do they stay the course with the current core group? KJ, what do you think?
Wow. I think for the most part, it's going to stay the course. I think when you look at the team, for the majority of it, particularly when you're going to qualify for the World Cup, I think the majority of them are going to be. It's not the fact that he's loyal to them, but I do think there's a chance where it's not a time for experimental places. It's not an invite. It's not a camp to give you an invite. I think of the names, if you're going to bring them in, they're coming in and they're staying in, and they are. If it's a Jebison or a Flores, it's they are potential to make you better. It's the Adam Banks theory, Mighty Ducks. Like, you're coming in, you're making us better. Sorry, someone's going to have to step aside. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, that's the harsh lessons. Someone's going to get cut and they're going to go, I'm walking off this bus. And you go, what do you mean? I've been with you the whole time. Sorry, he's just better. That's the hard lessons of professional sports, but, and pro sports. But other than that, I don't think there's going to be a lot of changes. But Charlie, you were on it. It was absolutely fascinating that John Herdman name-checked Flores, went out of his way to say it. So he's doing whatever he can now to get the message across, no?
That was genuinely hilarious because it was completely unprompted for John Herdman to say, I bet Marcelo Flores was watching this and thinking, maybe I should play for Canada. He knows what he's doing with that. John Herdman knows exactly what he's doing. But no, you're bang on with that. I think we've spoken before about how John Herdman feels about bringing a squad that's too big into camp. So in terms of taking these players into especially a World Cup qualifying camp just to be there, just to be part of the group, I don't think that's going to happen. There is a Nations League coming up in the summer. Maybe if these guys are going to come in, that's going to be when. But even still, I can't imagine there's going to be this massive influx of new blood in his team because of just what they've accomplished with the group that they have and how closely knit it is. I mean, maybe there's a name or two. Yeah, it sounds like Flores is a player that Herdman rates quite highly and obviously wants to be part of this group. And, if you want him to be part of the World Cup group, then you definitely want him in and involved as early as possible. But even still, I think the next window, the window where you're theoretically going to be celebrating qualifying for the World Cup, you want it to be the group that has qualified you for that World Cup and not really change anything about it.
No issues there. Another question from the chat. This is from Alex Trudeau, who wants to know, was that Jonathan David's best match for Canada? Even though he didn't score, he menaced the American defense with his hold-up and link-up play. And to add to Alex's question, are you guys more comfortable now seeing David and Kyle Larin playing together? Because the evolution that those two have had seems fitting. The more time, the more reps they've had together, that it's gotten more fluid and just overall better. But what do you guys make of that? And I guess let's go to Charlie first with this question.
Yeah, I think that was one of the most positive things about this game, especially just in the way that they linked up for that first goal, David and Larin, and then just the way that they played off the ball the entire game, being an important part of that defensive structure, doing all that running just across the American back line, putting players under pressure, taking away the space, because obviously Canada didn't have a ton of the ball, and when you don't, then you need your strikers to be part of that and be bought into that defensive structure. And as we've kind of highlighted before, David and Larin hadn't really started together in World Cup, in this octagon, since the very beginning of it, and then they've started these two games together consecutively. And John Herdman was asked about this actually after the game, and it was kind of an interesting answer, because he said that really the only reason that he felt so comfortable putting David and Larin together was because Davies wasn't there, which was interesting. He spoke about how, we found out that Alphonso wasn't coming into camp, so we figured this would be a good opportunity to put Kyle Larin and Jonathan David in those central areas together. And I'm not sure if that suggests that he doesn't see that as the way forward when Davies is back in camp, but I think they probably gave him a lot to think about. I still am not sure that it is necessarily his top choice, but it's clear that it is capable of working, and there is a good partnership developing there between these two players, which maybe we were a little bit unsure if it was going to develop. I don't know if you guys have seen it. If you guys would start them both together every game, I feel like you want to have them on the field, right?
Ollie, you want to go?
Yeah, I think, look, I think the partnership was always going to need a bit of time. So maybe, it probably was premature that we were starting to question whether it would work or not, after just a couple of games together. And you can start to see that there's more of an understanding, being gained between the two of them, more interplay between the two of them. And that obviously bodes well. I do think it's still going to be difficult to get Davies, Buchanan, David and Larin into the same team. That's going to be a team that is very top heavy. And I think we saw that a bit in the first game against Honduras, that sometimes it doesn't make you more dangerous to have, 4 really attacking guys at the expense of maybe having someone who can move the ball through midfield a bit more and give you more control. So that's going to continue to be a question when they're all available, is how do you accommodate all of them? Can you accommodate all of them, or does one have to sit and make an impact off the bench? But certainly when they do go with the two of them together, I thought there were promising signs, and a lot of promising signs, not just with the ball, but without it as well.
One of the things...
Sorry, go ahead, Adam.
No, I was going to say, one of the things that I thoroughly loved, KJ, about that partnership is immediately after the game, Kyle, of course, comes in for his post-match interview with me, and he's trying to play down the cold. The poor guy hasn't had a chance to put a parka on or get in the shower and warm up yet, and the first question was about the conditions, and he's shaking, saying, no, the cold didn't affect us any, and the poor guy is basically hyperventilating. But he was on Football Americas with Sebastian Salazar and Herculez Gomez, and they were... baiting him's the wrong word, but they were basically trying to get him to say, who's the best number 9 in CONCACAF? And he said, I don't care if I score. I don't care if David scores. I'm happy if Canada scores. And I think that really buys into the team mentality. KJ, just wanted to add that into the mix here.
I don't think there's any question about that. There's nobody stepping into John Herdman's office saying, I need to play today. You know what I mean? That's just not happening right now. There's nothing getting in the way of them finding the way to get the goal and get it to Qatar. That's the mission. That will not happen. I said earlier, I don't think the team's been seduced by the scoreline any when they're playing. And I say all the time, you have to evaluate your own talent better than anybody else. And I think they'll have a deep, hard look at that tactical game on Sunday and say, a lot of things went their way. A lot of things went their way, and they didn't have a lot of the ball. And at times they were really struggling, and to get the possession. Now the U.S. media is hammering the United States because they did nothing with the ball when they got into the final third, but they did control the game a lot. And Greg Berhalter has been, lambasted for the word of using dominant. But I would imagine, being a coach of that United States team, I can understand why he would use that word. I've seen Stephen A. Smith and others not agreeing with that, but he said they dominated the game because he sees the way that they controlled the ball. And in many ways, I can understand it. In this low-scoring sport of ours, sometimes things can go your way, bounce here, bounce there, goal early, goal late, and you can win games that maybe you may not have won before. So, but my overall point being is I think there's a lot of things they can work on. And I don't believe that, for me, if they were to start the World Cup tomorrow, that those two would play up front to back up the points that everyone said here. Buchanan's versatility is marvelous. He's played every minute of every game he's been available to play the last 6 games. The only game he didn't play was when he was suspended. He can play wing back. He can play central midfield. He plays as a number 10. He can play further forward. His pace is electric. And he's become a player you have to rely on. So for me, that's the key. And then, you work around the other two as you go. And I think that's more of the, it worked out well in this game, and both of them did a great job, central midfield, covering it and covering back and stopping that outlet pass into Adams. But for me, it's probably not an ideal formation going forward.
Well, it is 8:30. That means we have a special guest ready to join us. So we're going to say goodbye to Charlie O'Connor-Clark for now. But before we say goodbye, there's one last question for you, Charlie. It is Bilal Khan who wants to ask, what do you think of the adaptation without Alphonso Davies and Stefan Eustáquio playing 3 wingers, 2 of which played in the midfield positions?
3 wingers, 2 of which played in the midfield position. It was kind of
is Osorio
an interesting... Yeah, it was kind of a bit of a free-flowing role for Osorio, but the formation was interesting, especially the way that Canada kind of defended in a 4 sometimes in a 5. Just with these wide players like Larea and Johnston both on that side could kind of interchange with one another. Both of them are comfortable, in that defensive role or getting a little bit further up. Even on the left side with Adekubi and Tajon Buchanan, they're both comfortable playing as wingbacks, fullbacks, wider or wingers. So I think there was a lot to like about Canada's setup in those wide areas, and they kind of allowed themselves to set themselves up for success against the transition in that sense. So they were always going to have some trouble in the midfield, especially with 2 out-of-season players against probably, in my opinion, the best midfield in CONCACAF. So I think it's fair that they would want to kind of shift them out to the wings a little bit. And I mean, it worked out fairly well, I think.
I'd have to agree. Well, Charlie, thank you very much, buddy, again, for making half an hour for us today. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you might stick around, answer some of the questions in the chat, because there's literally 40 every time I reset. There's more and more. So, Charlie, thanks, mate. And, guys, make sure you're going to check out his work that we've cross-posted on OneSoccer.ca and, of course, for the Canadian Premier League. So, Charlie, thank you. Good night, and we'll be talking to you very, very soon.
Thanks,
cheers,
Charlie.
guys.
Charlie O'Connor-Clark, our really good friend who just puts in work after work after work. We do have another special guest. If we're going to replace Charlie O'Connor-Clark, we're going to do it with someone who has the same amount of clout as Charlie, and that's saying a lot, because we know how much we love some COC on this show. But our next guest, Jaime Macias, he joins us. He has been with beIN Sports since 2015, studio host and an analyst. Few people have a thorough understanding of CONCACAF as Jaime does, and a part that I picked out from your extensive bio, if I may, Jaime, a pilot as well. So you're already number 1 in my book on this show. Sorry, KJ. Sorry, Ollie.
I don't need to apologize. Jaime and I have bonded over racing stories many a
Yes,
time.
can't forget his motorsports Punisher as well. Jaime, thank you for joining us. How are you doing?
How are you doing, guys? A pleasure talking to you. Watching a little bit of soccer. It's a little bit crazy down in South America because they are playing today.
I can imagine. Let's start with the match tomorrow. Canada in El Salvador to take on a team that's still got something they're trying to prove, and I'm sure after some recent results, Jaime, they're feeling very, very encouraged. What's the talk around the country right now with your understanding of this region about Canada and El Salvador?
I think that they make a click on understanding that the real objective of this El Salvador national team was 2026. They were building a project to 2026, and that everything that they get in this qualifier was a gain, was a positive. But at the end, you need results to sustain the good sensations and the good impressions that the team built, and that's the most important thing on winning last week or during the weekend in Honduras. El Salvador hadn't won a game on the final round of a CONCACAF qualifier away since '69, when they beat Haiti to qualify for the 1970 World Cup. So that's how big this win against Honduras was in terms of history. Yeah, it's not going to have a big impact in the standings, but from the emotional part and from understanding that the team is in the right trajectory on this process, it was important.
Yeah, massive win, no doubt. Jaime, they've had 5 clean sheets in 10 games. 3 other games they've conceded 1 goal or less. Their stats, that's what you see from the analytics. We watch the games, you watch them even closer. You've commentated on some of these games. Their worst performance by a mile was the one in Toronto. at BMO Field. I know you were there for that. They weren't themselves that night. But other than that, this is a team defensively. They transition well. They press. What impresses you the most about this? And the coach who's done a great job with them as well.
How this team adapt to this kind of play. Like usually teams that feel they were weaker in CONCACAF, they tend to be very defensive and they stay very, very defensively. And if you see the Panama team that qualified for the World Cup, it's very different of how this Panama team plays. And Honduras is a team that plays very defensively, and we can say the same about Costa Rica. And what Hugo Perez have done, it's transformed this in absolutely the opposite. This is an offensive team. Yeah, there are times where you need to make fouls. There are times where you're going to play close to the goal, but it's a team that builds from behind, and that's not very common. I think that Canada, Panama, and El Salvador are the teams that had grown the most since the last process to this one. And imagine if the pandemic didn't happen and we still had the format of 6 teams. Well, probably the 3 of them will not be playing now. And we have 2 of them that they are basically in the qualifying spots with a comfort margin. So I think that we have to put that over the table.
Jaime, we've seen when Canada's gone on the road a few times during these qualifiers that, you know, places like Estadio Azteca and Honduras as well, when maybe not quite as intimidating and as frightening as they have been for Canada in the past. What kind of environment do you think they should expect in San Salvador tomorrow in terms of the atmosphere and that factor?
Probably compared to what they're going to find in Panama in the last round, it's going to be on a hostile environment. San Pedro is very hostile, but the situation Honduras was living when Canada played that game, basically out of the World Cup. They were not fighting for anything. The atmosphere didn't build around the national team, and as it could be this one, because of how El Salvador is playing and having a real chance on winning. Like, imagine what the story will be for them to be the team that defeats the undefeated team in the CONCACAF qualifier. It will be a big story. So it's going to be a very, very hostile atmosphere. It's a stadium that it's a very close stadium. It's a very small stadium that, well, small compared to big North American city. When I say close or small stadium, I mean that the stands are very close to the pitch. And I don't know if you saw those images when Mexico played over there, how Memo Ochoa was on goal, avoiding all kinds of bottles and stuff that was falling and raining from the stand. So that's kind of the atmosphere that it's gonna have Canada, and it's gonna be a test for the Canadian national team, because I think that one of the key of Canada in this qualifier is how Canada have adapted to different contexts, to different scenarios, to different atmosphere. But this one is the first one they're going to face it. The climate probably is going to be the same. The climate, I mean, like the humidity and all that stuff, is going to be kind of what happened in Honduras. But the atmosphere around the game is going to be completely different.
Right. Yeah. I think it's going to feel a lot more like we were expecting it to in Honduras. And as you mentioned, the conditions around it sort of took that element away, which for the Canadian perspective is probably a good thing, but it certainly didn't feel the same as a match in Tegucigalpa or San Pedro Sula would. Now, Jaime, throughout the show, we've been getting questions in from the chat, and we talked about the Americans earlier before we had you on. I'd love to get your thoughts on the 2-0 win for Canada as well, and the answer to this question from Dave Hodgkiss, who asks, am I the only Canadian soccer fan that felt the United States team was overrated and has been for the past several years, maybe since Clint Dempsey? So, Jaime, what do you make of that comment? And do you think there's perhaps a bit too much hype for these Americans, or is it warranted?
I think that the amount of players that the U.S. have now in Europe grows the talking points around the national team. But at the same time, I feel that for the first time in their history, the USA national team has to deal with expectation. I think it's the first time that the country thinks they have a team capable of achieving something on soccer outside the Gold Cup and CONCACAF. And like, I was watching shows today in the U.S. Sports shows for different sports, and they were opening on criticizing Greg Berhalter. You will never imagine a basketball or an NFL show criticizing Greg Berhalter for how the team played. Even if it's fair or unfair, well, there is a lot of pressure over the national team for the first time, and they're dealing with that. But at the same point, I think that there is some talent in the US that it's probably on the peak of the history of national teams, especially the midfielders. You were talking about Adam McKennie and Musa. They are world-class midfielders, but I feel they are like in a kind of a too hard structure from a tactical point of view, that the team does not have freedom. That all this dominance that Bill had to talk and the possession and what the stats shows, well, that gotta be reflected on playing. And for example, Pulisic is a victim of the system. He's in a certain position. He cannot move from there. The ball doesn't get to Pulisic, and he doesn't have the freedom to move around to get in contact with the ball. You compare with Canada, that's a very old machinery. The game that Jonathan David played falling as a number 10 because Canada didn't have Eustachio and didn't have Atiba, and the number 9, the top scorer of the French league, he was coming back and playing as a number 10, playing for Larin because that's what the team needed, and the team adapt to those scenarios. Well, that's what you expect of a team.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a great point. I get the feeling they're rigid. Go ahead, Ollie.
I was just going to say, I agree with that completely. I think that they've got, Berhalter's one of those coaches, I think, who likes that style of play, a bit like Pep Guardiola, where it's very structured. It's all about controlling the ball, moving teams around. It can be a bit slower at times to try and open teams up. And I think the group of players he's got, it's not a coincidence that a lot of these players have ended up in the Bundesliga, because they are well suited to being really vertical, really quick, counter-pressing all the time. And that's just not his football. And I think there is a real clash there that is a problem for the States. And, as much as they can say, they dominated that game in terms of possession on Sunday, there were some really alarming moments where they won the ball, turned the ball over, and it just went sideways or backwards when there was an opportunity to really play forwards and cause Canada problems. That's something that, I'm just not sure that the players and the coach, not that he's a bad coach, I just don't know if they're clicking in the way that they need to.
I think they're all fair points. I do think, I'll back up what I said earlier, they remind me a little bit of England, where when they lose, it's just the world is just coming, just falling apart. You know what I mean? Yeah. And when they win, it's like, here we go, football's coming home. Do you know what I mean? It's like the contrast in the way that the media is all over this team. In many ways, I have so much admiration for it, because I think we need to get there as a nation in Canada. Right now, we're going like this, and we're about 15 to 20 years behind them with the development of a league, and now more people are getting involved in it. And how it's cross-promoted into different things, and national networks are talking about it, and it's exciting. And Canada will have their downtime as well. I agree with all that. The one thing I would say, and I've said it consistently, they don't play enough games away from home. They're not tough enough to win games away from home. Their away record the last 10 years is woeful. Go look it up. They do not win away from home at good teams. They beat Honduras, but they're not a good team now. They haven't beat good teams for 10 years. They play Gold Cups every time they play them. They play them at home. They don't get mentally tough. Nations League games at home. The games against Mexico in the finals, they were tough. They were tough games, and they won them, but they were at home. And I know the Mexicans are in the stands as well, but that does not get you ready to play tough games away from home. However, I do think defensively, they can be organized, and I do think they will get to the World Cup, and I think they can do some damage, because they're difficult nut to crack, and they're a bit more of a tournament team than a team that suits themselves to these qualifiers. They still need to get Reina back, and he's a special player. Stefan's far better than Turner, in my opinion, and would have saved that Larin goal. So again, sometimes it's very, very close, fine lines, as you say, between win and loss.
There is a couple of things of there. Sorry, Adam.
No, please go ahead.
No, there's a couple of things over there, like that you see on the team, and I was talking about adapting. Okay, the first 2 or 3 goal kicks, the wind stopped the ball. Probably you have the order to play vertical long balls, but at the third time it doesn't work. Do something else. You gotta adapt to the context of the game. There was wind coming behind you, and that has a big impact on the game. That's how the first goal happened. And it's not about tactics, it's not about lineup, it's just about figuring out what the pitch is throwing you, and about what you were talking, Chris, on playing too many games in home. So, and it's not the same, and it's not just a semantic difference playing at home that being the host. And the US is the host for a lot of tournaments, but they don't have this feeling of playing away and playing at home, because When they decided to play in Minnesota, now against Honduras, my biggest question was, why are you going to a place that is going to affect your performance to the worst team? Because why? Because Canada took Mexico to Edmonton. That had a logical reason. The same logical reason that it's why Canada took the US to Hamilton.
Yeah.
Those decisions on why I'm going to play home, it's to take an advantage. Then it can work out or cannot work out. But it has to be a logical decision. You need to know why you are taking that. You are playing that game at a certain field.
Yeah, I'm going to hit a quick timeout because I want to talk more about the decision to be in St. Paul, but we actually have a ton of questions coming in from the chat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through 3 right now and just assign them to everyone. And then we have some more we want to talk about El Salvador and, of course, the Americans. So let's start with a question from Jeff Salisbury, and I'm going to assign this one to KJ. And Jeff asks for the panel, so KJ in this question, what does Canada need to do tactically to win tomorrow, and what battles on the field will determine that?
Well, I think that their game management skills have been exceptional, no matter what throughout the time, right? They've managed it really well. What they have to understand about El Salvador is they press very well, but they don't have an attacking threat. They don't shoot very much. They don't have a lot of shots on goal. They had 0 shots on goal at BMO Field. And they're, even though they're an attacking threat in terms of, changing their mentality under Perez, they're not a dangerous team. So I think that they can play a little bit higher up as a defensive line and understand they're not going to get beat behind. So they can definitely close the lines up with that tactically. And I think they'll go again with the system with a similar system that we've seen. We know this whole campaign was based around the box midfield with a back 5 for a while, right? And the interchange between Johnston and Larin and all that. And the more we've seen them play, the more they've gone to a 4. More and more they've gone to a 4. And I think we're going to expect more and more that they're going to do that. They're not changed a lot. So I think tactically that's how they'll line up. And as I said earlier, I think if they can get a Stacchio and a Atiba Hutchinson in midfield, that's a win, because they've not played a lot of games together, but they were exceptional together against Mexico and Edmonton. Exceptional. For a CONCACAF midfield, there's a 2. Brilliant. So that's the quick answer to that for me, is that's where they can win the game.
Thank you for the question, Jeff. I'm going to go to Ollie with the next question from R. And R asks, thoughts on Canada being 35th in the FIFA men's rankings? Of course, the brilliant people with their spreadsheets that have cracked FIFA's grading code and can see match
deep
by
dive on
match.
this today. I'm not going to lie. I've got it all notes here. Deep dive. I got lost in the weeds. Sorry.
I should pass this. I should pass this on to KJ then, because I have not taken a deep look into this yet. I think it's still fairly remote. KJ, is that right? The chance of getting into pot 3, but I've not looked in much detail.
Yeah, I've got lots of details on it. There's a few things that can happen yet. We've got to wait to find out whether Jaime's as schooled about world soccer as anybody. But can Ecuador make it? That'll be a good thing for Canada if Ecuador can make it. Is there any way that Sweden don't get there, or Poland, and somehow Russia can get there? Different things like that. I'll put it all out there maybe after tomorrow's game on social media, but there is a chance that it can happen. Canada could go up to 33 or 34 if they win in the world rankings tomorrow. So obviously there's lots of other games going on. Australia let a goal in overnight in the 89th minute. That affected their ranking last night as well. So lots of different scenarios, but yeah, to Ollie's point, he's right. It's a long shot, but it definitely could still happen to get into pot 3.
You want to speak KJ's love languages, just talk potentials and Excel spreadsheets. There's few people.
I feel bad. I stole Ollie's answer, so I'm going on mute.
No, that's more than okay.
Okay, so we'll go to Ollie then for this. How do you think Canada will play in Qatar? And this is from Nico Walk. I hope I'm saying that right. How do they play to try? Do they try and play for wins, or do they sit back and play a block to try and get points in Qatar, Ollie?
I don't think they're going to sit back and play a block, so to speak. But I think this is an interesting thing about Canada is that, sometimes maybe you see a team that's the top team in their region, and you expect the top teams to play a style they like to have a lot of the ball, right? They like to commit men forward, take risks and all of those things. And then when they get to a World Cup and they have to do that against, Germany or Spain, it can be very difficult. That's not the case with Canada. Canada's real threat is how quickly they can go from back to front, which it has been absolutely remarkable in these games, how dangerous they've been in some of their most vulnerable moments. And so that actually, you would think, maybe translates quite well to playing against, a stronger caliber of opponent at a World Cup finals. You can imagine Canada, no matter who they're playing against, even if they are outclassed in terms of talent, they still have the potential to pose a threat when you've got Alphonso Davies and Jonathan David on the field. So the big test will be how they can handle or how they can hold up defensively against stronger opponents. And we'll see on that front, but they should be able to be threatening against anyone. And that's something that gives you hope that they're going to be competitive and have a chance of getting a result or two.
Thank you for that question. Jaime, one from you. This comes from Aaron Hooper, and Aaron wants to know, how far do you think Canada can make it in the World Cup? And who do you think would be good countries or good types of countries, playing styles of countries for Canada to match up with, to be drawn into, to succeed in the tournament? And thank you for that question, Aaron.
In terms of systems, I think that any team that does not play the system Canada plays, or the way Canada plays, is a good suit. That's one of the key points of tomorrow and the last day against Panama. I think that Panama, Canada, and El Salvador, they with different levels, they part from certain characteristics, and that's why those two games were the biggest scoring games for Canada. Because when you play a team that plays kind of what you play, well, the dominant team is going to outscore you. When you have different styles, well, you balance yourself. Everybody's in a comfort zone. How far it's going to go? Well, today in the morning there was a quote talking in the South American radio show pre the games of today, and I said, like, Canada played than any team in South America. So you can imagine people didn't like that word, but I really think that this is a team that it's playing at a great level. And if you say quarterfinals, why not? At the end, a lot depend on the draw, because if you finish second and the group that is next to you has Germany or France, well, you can do it, but your chances are lower than if you are facing another team. But if you tell me quarterfinals, I wouldn't think it's a long shot.
Jaime making a lot of Canadian fans in the
What
chat
a time
right
to be
now.
alive.
I'm going to bounce this back to you, Jaime, because you alluded to it, and I'd love for KJ and Ollie to weigh in as well. But even in just this short amount of time, Jaime, how do you think Canada's perception has changed across CONCACAF, especially in Central American countries where the Americans and the Mexicans might pay a little bit more attention to Canada just due to proximity, but everyone in Central America has seen Canada now. They obviously see Canada top the table. So how has that narrative changed around Les Rouges?
Well, when I went to Toronto for the first two rounds, well, the first and the third one, because the second was in the US, and I started telling people, hey, this team is gonna make it, and even some friends that work in the Canadian Federation, they look at me like, oh, it's looking good, but this is just starting. Even though, and it was after Canada draw against Honduras, and I was talking to the Honduras TV and says, guys, not a lot of teams are gonna score points in this stadium. This is a great point that Honduras has scored, and they were looking like, you sure? Yeah, it's a great point. And you see, the only team that haven't scored points in that apart from Honduras, the only team that didn't lose in Canada is Jamaica, because they haven't played yet. Canada have beat all the other teams at home. So from what I wrote at the beginning of the qualifiers, what I think why this team had the strength that it has and why it was in the right path. Well, I got a lot of people now asking me, hey, talk to me about Canada. What do you think about these guys? Everybody knows who Eustachio is. Everybody knows who Hutchinson is. Everybody knows Borian. Everybody knew before this David and Alphonso David. But they know now the players, and they know Adecugbe. And on my show in Spanish, I was talking with my co-host, and it says, like, this Herdman had read Salvador Bilardo book, because it's a team that dominates every single detail of the game. I was saying, well, if you see that Herdman has some things of Salvador Bilardo, I would say, like, I've seen some of Jose Luis Chilaver stuff in Borian, on the way he managed the time, on the way he celebrates his saves, on the way, like, tactics is one thing, but this is a sport of details. That non-football things, and that's what Canada is showing to the world, that they are not just a team that play great, and that they just don't have a guy in Bayern Munich and another guy leading the top scorers in France. That it's the whole package.
Yeah, it's that toughness. No, it's what Ollie and I talk about a lot on the show and post-game shows as well. For me, it's that game management. They never bend, they bend, they never break. Even in the US game on Sunday, there was opportunities where past teams would have been able to do that. Game management, as you said, knowing when to stop the game with whistles. They're really, really good at bringing in key fouls and knowing when to play the key fouls. Now, all of those things are really important. They sound really small, but they're not, because that is massively part of game management and seeing it through CONCACAF. And they've embraced the brawls, the physicality of it. They've embraced it. They're not letting people bully them, and they stand on top of people. I rewatched the Mexico game again today, in parts of it from Edmonton, and it really stood out again. We noticed it being in the stadium, but what really stood out to me more than anything was just how soft Mexico were. And I think they still are, by the way. Now that they're a soft team, and I thought they were poor again in the 0-0 against Costa Rica. So for me, they're probably going to make the World Cup, and their destination and their destiny and Qatar will be, can you finally get to the quarterfinals of the World Cup? And that will be how they're evaluated, but not the way that they're playing. I've seen people tweeting out right now, they may not be seeded. Well, they don't deserve to be seeded, in terms of pot one. They're miles away from where they should be right now, Ollie. So for me, it's Canada rising to the top right now at CONCACAF, but for me, the way that they handled Mexico pretty handily in Edmonton is the overriding image for me about how this is a very different, contrasting team.
And there's an explanation at the end, because you see there is a project behind. There is a league. There are MLS teams. There are players playing abroad. There is an identity. Like, it's not that this is a golden generation and what are we gonna do when this generation expires? Like, we gotta enjoy it. Like, it happens to a lot of other countries. When you see the what's behind the national team in terms of club structure, soccer academies, careers, well, I don't know if there is going to be another Alphonso Davies, but at the end, at least you're going to have a lot of players to choose to see if you have one.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think it's almost like, I think in Canada, we're almost more cautious than everyone else in kind of coming to terms with that and accepting the fact that this is for real, right? Like, Jaime said there a minute ago that they could go to the quarterfinals of the World Cup, and I don't think he's wrong, but I would still feel like scared of saying that, right? A friend of mine was telling me after, I think 2 or 3 qualifiers, that he had an MLS coach texting him, they're not just going to qualify, they might win the group, finish first. And, that's turned out to be correct. So I think we're almost a bit more hesitant than others to really say, like, yeah, this team isn't just an illusion or a fluke. It's for real. And as Jaime says, I think it's something that could be built for a long time.
So I want to end on this, because there's been multiple comments, especially since Jaime made his comment about Canada and South American teams. But I'll ask you this, and here are 3 examples. Who do you want to see Canada play in a World Cup match? Group stage, quarterfinal, what have you? What's the nation you want to see Canada line up against, and why? A 3-Goals Roomba says, imagine getting in a group with England. Xavier Martinez says, I would like to see Canada versus Argentina or Brazil. And then Rusaki says, bro, can you imagine Canada versus France? Yeah, that's where we are right now, is we are allowed to imagine these things, Jaime. What would be your dream Canada versus blank matchup heading into this Qatar World Cup, assuming they get the points they need to get there?
It's a tough one. For sure, the France is going to be super, super interesting. But I think the Argentina clash it will be amazing. I think that will be amazing. You're not asking me to choose who I think is gonna win or who I would like to win.
No, I'm not asking for a prediction. Just a story you'd love to see.
No. I would love the game with Argentina, but like at the end, I say like it would be amazing for Messi to win it if this is. So I will prefer the Canada-Brazil, which I would prefer Canada to win against Brazil.
I love that answer. KJ, what's your dream matchup for Canada?
Well, I said last week on the show, if they get England, then Charlie O'Connor-Clark's going on the BBC, and Ollie's probably going on Sky. So that would be great, because obviously John Herdman connection. I'll go a little bit different after my deep dive into the World Cup pots today, and I'll say Qatar, because if they get Qatar, happy days with the group. Yeah. So they can avoid all the number 1 seeds and get Qatar, and maybe just for even better purposes, let's take the first game of the day of the tournament and have the World Cup opener, Qatar versus Canada. That would be pretty special.
Yeah,
Ollie?
that was going to be my answer. Get the easy pot one team and have a better chance at the knockout stage. I'd like to say Italy as well. I'd like to put Petrillo through that one, but they might not qualify, so we may not get the opportunity.
That's right.
Even when we don't bring up Italy, Ollie finds a way to twist the knife and make sure everyone's paying attention. That's great.
I love that comment. Canada loves Jaime. Welcome on the club.
Yes, Canada does love Jaime. Thank you.
I bring something from the.
Look
at that. Love it.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is our hour. So I want to say, if you're not already, I strongly recommend you go follow Jaime on Twitter. It's at Jaime F. Macias. I'm sure the One Soccer social account will be retweeting clips from the show anyways. But yes, Jaime, one final massive thank you from everyone here at One Soccer for taking some time out for us and sharing your insight with the Canadian supporters who are just over the moon right now.
Great job, mate.
It's a pleasure, guys, talking to you. Thank you for having me, and we chat about motorsport another time, Chris.
Yeah, motorsport and aviation, Jaime. You're my new guy for that. And, of course, Charlie and Christian and Oliver and Armin behind the scenes, thank you to you three for your input as well and getting these roundtables out to the public, and the comments as well have been absolutely sensational. Of course, a reminder, the match tomorrow. Join us for a full 1 hour pre-match match day live show with the game kicking off later on in the evening. It is a late start tomorrow, so be sure to have some coffee ready, especially for those in Newfoundland who might be up for a late one. Kirsten will certainly have his tea. So at One Soccer is the place to be for the best news, views, and everything else around the game. And one final thank you to you, the chat, and for everyone for joining us. And we will see you very, very soon once again here on the One Soccer Roundtable. Good night.